So I'm going to kind of do this thing, the NAR, we'll call it the NAR settlement matrix.
Hey, this is Blake Sloan. I've been selling real estate over 14 years. Our team of highly trained professionals, along with our unmatched marketing, has sold thousands of homes here in the Myrtle Beach area, and this is how we do it.
This is the third most important part here, which is, I think we miss this a lot. It's our weakest part, is you have to do this through self-discovery. What do you think that means?
You gotta spend more time on discovery.
It's a little deeper. This is to the client. So this whole thing is going to be articulated, and it's going to be presented to them through self-discovery. What do you think that means? You have to, because you're shifting their worldview. Their worldview, basically, of everyone has just been what? Shattered by the new stuff. And so your job is to take that one that's basically been misled to them, and you change that, and you have to reframe that worldview to them. But to do that is through self-discovery. What does self-discovery mean for your client? They have to find it. They have to find it. Meaning it has to be done through questions. I have to help them self-discover through questions. The only way that you'll change your mind. If you do not do this through self-discovery, you're going to fall flat and they're not going to listen to you. So it has to be done through questions. Now I'll explain some of those in a minute, but for example, who remembers the word that I spelled out for you a couple years ago? Airport, right? And that was what, 4 years ago? Longer? Huh?
At least
5 years ago. And I spelled out a word for everyone and just say, hey, we did experiment. And I'm going to spell this word out for you, AIRPORT. And what did that spell? Everyone came in, 5 years later, you remember the exact word. Why? Because that was through self-discovery. I didn't tell you the word, you discovered it yourself by putting the words together. Does that make sense? Or the letters together? And so it's important for us to understand that you have to do this, and they must come to the conclusion. But here, more importantly, the reason I put this in here is I need you guys to catch yourself and hold yourself accountable when you catch yourself starting to tell them. So I can't tell them what's going on with economics. What do I have to do? Ask questions. Hey, do you guys know how the overall economics of the process works? No. Do you know how the economics of the listing side works? No. Do you know how the economics of the buyer side works? No. And so I start to lead them down this path of self-discovery that allows them to do that. And so what I go through there are questions like why, what, when, and how. Why, what, when, and how. So we're talking about what's going on, why it is the way it is, right? How it's going on, and when things change and what they're doing now. And I just ask those type of questions to them in regards to what? Commissions, value, what's happening from that standpoint. And so we're light years ahead of anybody else. It's still going to be difficult for a period. Why? Because their worldview has been shifted. Every news article will look the same. But you read the actual facts, it's not even close. Which is, anytime I see that, my spider sense goes off, right? Post-COVID. So I see something in the news, it just doesn't make total sense. You start looking at the facts, and guess what? It's total opposite. And so there's a lot of people who've been woken up, right, since COVID, that our news flat out lies to us all the time, right? Our news basically parrots propaganda to us legally, consistently, over and over and over and over and over. You notice they're all in unison too. Anytime you see the same people say the same exact thing across the entire country, there's usually something behind it, which is usually what? An agenda. And so if I understand that, I can look at things differently now and I can rise above that. Okay? Which I want you guys to understand overall with that. You have to have, I put telling, not selling, right? They must see it and they must own it. So they must see it. They must own it. What does that mean? What do you think that means? They must own it.
They have to actually acknowledge it.
They have to acknowledge and believe it, right? They have to have this thing that I need you guys to watch for in your presentations, in your value presentations. They must have an aha. You must see the what? The aha moment. The light bulb go off like, oh, that makes sense. And that becomes the justification in their mind in why they're willing to pay more to work with you and why they're willing to pay more for a professional. And I feel that me as a professional has a responsibility because you're going to have a lot of reckless agents who are very desperate, do anything and everything to survive in this business and feed their families, and they're going to do a lot of bad to clients. Period. I've seen it happen before. After 2008. Okay, so it's one of those things that I want you guys to understand. Like, look, my job as a leader, as an expert in this industry, is taking them through. If I just start telling about economics and telling about benefits, what's going to happen? They're going to nod their head, say, yeah, great, nice to meet you. Sorry, going down to the next one. Because that issue of value versus cost is going to come into play. And as we talked about, cost is only an issue in the absence of value. And so I must stack it here, but I have to understand, like, cut route, and they just do a lot of telling, but the people aren't self-discovering through. They'll never, ever, ever change until you have them self-discover. I'll say it again. They'll never, ever, ever change until you have them self-discover. Okay, which is important. We can dig on questions of that later on and how to do that, but that's super important. And the fourth piece, which is very, very important here, is the game has changed, and you're going to have to level up your ability to be a closer. I'm going to go as far as to say to make it in this business, right, you're going to have to make sure that you're a master closer. The good news for you is master closer is what? It's a skill set. It's a skill set. It's not a natural ability. In my opinion, when I wrote this out, the days of an order taker are dead. Why? Because commission pressure is going to be so tight that they're going to just do what they can, take the next 1% deal, the next 1% deal, the next 1% deal until what? Until the pain is too tough to stay in the real estate business and they locate to somewhere else in a different job. It's not a quick death. It's a very slow death that people understand, and all of a sudden the pain gets worse and gets worse and gets worse and gets worse because they just give in and take the path of least resistance, and ultimately they end up waking up one day, I can't do this anymore. You have two choices. You can just ride the wave, keep doing what you're doing, you're going to get squeezed out. You have to be good at closing. Because why? This makes sense on the surface, but you got to be a closer to get them to come to the conclusion. You have to be willing to ask tough questions. You have to be willing to understand and navigate what to say next. So for me, I'm excited about this. It's going to make everyone better, but it's going to wipe out all the people in the middle. I'm just telling you, it's just definitely going to be that. And so your second piece, you're going to have to be willing to have a collision with your clients. Why? You have to be willing to have a collision with your clients up front in terms of what your value is, in terms of being a professional. They're going to need that in many cases because they think they know it all and what's going on. You're going to need to have a collision with them at the time of offer when you're going to have to be willing to ask for that money and say, hey, look, there's a 1-2% deficiency here, or in some cases a 3% deficiency here. Excuse me, do you want me to have the seller pay for this, or yes or no? And they say, no. Well, how do you want to cover it? No problem. And do that with certainty. And you're also going to have to do what? Collide and close with the other agent. So if there's a 0% co-broke, you're going to have to be able to negotiate that in the form of a co-broke or closing costs. The good news for us is that we're in the know here that if closing costs are tight for your people, now we have the ability to go negotiate. And I have a whole word track I'm going to show you guys next week that we can add an addendum that's a buyer contingency based on getting paid 3%, which is pretty cool. But it doesn't, it's much simpler to get 1 or 2% deficiency from your people. So if there's a flat out no commission, right, we can offer that as a buyer contingency. And I already have the verbiage and everything for that. That makes sense? So basically, contract is contingent upon buyer required commission being paid by the seller of 3%. It's going to be a little, the first couple of times, you're like, what the fuck is this? But it's there. It's legal. I verified it. I did a whole thing with the guys on whatever you call it, the South Carolina Association of Realtors, which show the way we've been doing this for the past decade is fully legal and fully able. And that's what everybody's going to have to start doing. So we're light years ahead, but it's still not going to be easy. Does that make sense, you guys? So
You have to do that, like if there's a difference between 1 or 2%, just put that little addendum together and that's it.
So we'll teach on that. That's what I want to teach on both today. I feel that if it's a full no commission, we'll use that one. If there's a deficiency, I'm going to do it the old way for now. Does that make sense? I'm hoping that this whole thing doesn't fall off a cliff and nobody has co-brokes. That's my hope. Do I trust it? No, because there's a lot of weak agents. Like I said, I'm watching guys on Mastermind talk about charging hourly. I'm like, you're an idiot. Like, what are you doing? Just protect it. Nothing's changed, right? So if you have the company with crappy co-brokes, the other 6,000 agents don't want to show your stuff either. Right. So reputation matters, right? It's important for us to remember in that scenario. Third piece here that we're going to have to get very, 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 very good at, much better than we are, is the word tracks. So role plays going to have to go to a whole new level for yourself, for other things like I only want to work with listing agent. Things like the other agent's only taking 2.5%. Why should I pay you 6%? Right? You're going to need all these great word tracks that are very, very beneficial and helpful to make sure that you're able to get what you deserve. And it's going to need to fly off the handle, right? Like type stuff. You've seen when he has the twins, they're really good. Then he picks the guy out the crowd, what happens? He's a total dud, and you're like, what an idiot. I would never do business with that guy. But guess what? You're that guy in the real estate industry. You just don't realize it. Does that make sense? Like, when you get an objection, we pull objection on Tuesdays, nobody can do it. You're the guy in the audience that you're looking at, judging it out of on the video, like, man, what an idiot. But you got to be very good at understanding it. Look, this is where we got to make sure that we're good at going forward. And the good news is we have to work together and start identifying, hey, what are you getting? So on Thursday, it's going to matter more than ever. Because, hey, what are you getting? What are the buyers saying? What objections are you getting? What are you getting? You're going to get different objections in the buyer presentation now than you have before. So it's important for us to get those, assimilate those all together for us, and I'll help you figure out what to say, practice them, and then we get it back out. Does that make sense? So data and objections are going to be very, very important. So anytime you get an objection or a no sign, you're going to have to need to make sure you record that so we can all come together, figure out what are the top 20% of objections we're getting 80% of the time, and figure out ways around that. Does that make sense? And all I have is a great word track between myself and my network that we can make sure we can overcome anything. You with me on this? Does that make sense? The reason I wanted to highlight that is because you're going to have to make sure that you're doubling down on these right now. This can be really easy if you can just get a couple word tracks like, yeah, I can do my taxes at Walmart, but that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, would it? Right? If you obviously have someone who's an affluent client. But if I have an affluent client who's paying lots of money in taxes, right, you make that. I can Google myself and put ChatGPT on my phone and go to court, but that's probably not going to work out real good for me, is it? No, right? So you guys got to understand the stakes here are higher than ever for you and your family when you're buying your largest asset. Not to mention all the deals you're going to miss out on, but not even knowing what's in the off-market deals that we have, right? All the stuff that you can talk about. But you're going to have word tracks that you pull out like crazy for every possible thing. Okay? And so I would commit to for the next 3 months, like role playing every morning with somebody based on what you're getting. You know what I mean? It's just going to be important. Then once you got it, and the whole landscape becomes so much easier. And then the other piece here, which I mentioned earlier, but this is different than this, is I want you guys to understand you're going to have to master third-party stories for everything. The biggest ones are going to be for a buyer's agent, meaning a buyer who didn't have an agent, and guess what happened? They got screwed. So that's why the Thursdays are going to be so important. Any horror story that you hear about, that's what you need to do. Bring it, share it, talk about it. That's because we want to share in all these horror stories. But I need you to have like your index card of your number one buyer agent horror story and your number one listing agent horror story. We have the one right now. I'll make sure you guys. I need everybody to know our name. Yeah, I don't think that's the right one, but I'll make sure that I'll find it for you. I'll almost share it in the group after the meeting so you guys remember it. She's in our CRM. She came to our website. She came for a home value on our website after the house closed. Talked to her. She was sick to her stomach. She sold it without an agent. The buyer's agent, who was the buyer's father, was the buyer's agent, and they sold it for $80,000 less than it was worth, even on our website. And so that's a big, big thing to understand. Like, look, so I think it was like $260,000 house. So ultimately, $7,500 cost her $80,000. Right? So is it worth a 10 times return to protect yourself if I can help show you how you make sure that you get the most amount of money for your home? Absolutely. Right? But people don't understand that they just give their equity away because they're too busy stepping over dollars to pick up nickels. Okay? You want to make sure you have these word tracks. So buyer's agent one, listing agent one, which is super important. And then obviously the only listing agent one you want to make sure you have a story about. And the same thing, hey, if that was such a great thing for a consumer, they still wouldn't have created a law for buyer agency. Does that make sense? Like they literally created a law against it because it was such a disadvantage for any person working with a listing agent. Does that make sense? And how do I get them with that? Ask a question. Hey, do you know the difference between listing agent and buyer agency? Do you know the difference between sub agency and buyer's agent? That's a great one, right? Do you guys know? Great, that's a great thing. I absolutely appreciate that. We've getting a lot of calls about that lately. Let me ask you a question. Do you know the difference between sub agency and buyer agency? No. Okay, well, and then just go right to the next thing. Does that make sense? And you're able to do that through what? Questions. But I really want you guys to make a commitment that self-discovery is going to have to how you're going to help you. Why? Because it's such a hard line. So the only way for me to break through the hard line is through what? Questions like this. And eventually I'm going to have them come on the other side here in that scenario. And don't be afraid to ask, because you may get that, oh, that's my house 4%. Well, tell me more about that. What was the experience like? You know what I mean? And they could have sold it in 2 weeks. Doesn't mean you got the most amount of money for it. You know, that's the thing you got to understand. Like, look, I can have a very cheap attorney, but the outcome is usually not very good. Ever. You know what I mean? Like, it just is what it is. And so you're going to, it's in a service-based business, you always get what you pay for.